Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and I've got an extra special episode this week. It's a spoiler-free review, followed by a spoilerific in-depth analysis of the anime Steins. Don't worry, I'll let you know exactly when to stop the video to avoid any major spoilers. Steins is an anime available on Blu-ray and DVD from Funimation. It can also be watched on Hulu or through Funimation's site. That is, with the exception of the anime's sequel movie. They've got the license for it, but haven't done jack shit with it in over 2 years. You can import that one with English subs, no problem. To keep things simple, Steins is about a makeshift lab of misfits who wind up accidentally inventing a time machine with a microwave they built to be controlled by their phones. This machine allows them to send emails into the past, which can vastly change their entire universe. More specifically, our protagonist, Okabe Rintaro, is the only one who can carry his memories over when the timeline is altered, allowing him to observe the phenomena from a unique perspective. He and his lab members wind up biting off way more than they can chew, and Okabe goes on a journey across time, filled with intrigue and upset. Its unique approach to time travel makes it one of the best science fiction anime out there. Its art style, when compared to its original visual novel source material, which had characters with uncanny, intimidating eyes and stark textures, is expressive and engaging, and has a high contrast, sterile palette that adds to the anime's mystery and science fiction themes, often feeling dreary. In a good way, I swear. We have a lovely cast of characters, each pretty damn original compared to what I've seen in other shows. Let's start with Okabe, a poor college student who hides behind the persona of a mad scientist, Hoin Kyoma, when made uncomfortable or insecure. In this state, he pretends to be on a mission to disrupt world order, avoiding the schemes of an unknown organization out to thwart him. He's clearly immature and acts like a total nutcase, but his charisma brings him and his friends together. Our leading lady is Makise Kurisu, a brilliant scientist who puts up with Okabe's antics out of sheer scientific curiosity for the machine he and his lab accidentally constructed. Then there's Mayuri, an adorable airhead who's Okabe's childhood friend and lab groupie of sorts. Despite not keeping up with the lab's scientific research, she has a big heart and helps remind everyone of what's important. We have Daru, a nerdy otaku with an obsession with eroge and a talent for hacking. Later on we see Moeka, a mysterious, antisocial textaholic who rarely ever speaks out loud. Feris, a spunky young girl dominating the cosplay world while working at a cat-maid cafe. Ruka, a young boy tending to the local shrine who aspires to be, and is often mistaken for, a cute girl. And Suzuha, a part-timer who works below Okabe's apartment and eavesdrops on him in his lab. They not only interact interestingly, but they all serve as major motivators for the plot. Steins is loaded with dramatic questions, such as, how does this time travel work? Should they mess with time travel in the first place? What sorts of emails will they send to the past? And why is Okabe the only one who can remember the events of a previous timeline? There is absolutely no filler for this one, so it does a great job playing toward and introducing its questions. By the end, all of these questions are answered in quite the ultimate finale. The opening's animation is really catchy, especially at the chorus, where we go through a sort of warp speed effect that propels us forward at a major point of the song. The ending credits are also quite lovely. I almost always watch both of them when going through the anime. Honestly, the anime doesn't have a huge soundtrack, and whatever's there isn't too memorable, but it's effective nonetheless. The voice acting, in Japanese of course, is wildly diverse and energetic. Okabe, specifically, is able to sound endearing as well as unbelievably silly, with minimal transition. None of the characters here sound like characters I've heard before, lending them a nice sense of originality. Funimation's dub, on the other hand, has decent voices, but the writers butchered the script, turning the redonkulous Okabe into an overly literate, scholarly sap. It completely ruins the mood and intentions of the original characters. So just stick with subtitles. You'll be glad you did. On my anime list, Steins currently rocking an impressive 9.2 score, and it deserves every bit of love it can get. I also include the movie to my verdict as well, seeing as how it's very enjoyable despite being pretty silly. My personal verdict? Legendary. Buy it. Love it. Be glad to be living in a time where this anime is available. Clearly I wouldn't be making the following analysis unless I loved it so much. It's filled with just so much awesome logic and philosophical discussion that it truly needs to be looked at more deeply. As promised, we'll be jumping into the analysis section of the video, It's really meant for those who have seen the show already, so if you haven't, do it, and report back to watch the rest of this video. Spoilers ahead.
You have been warned.
To be able to understand what Steins Gate is doing with its time travel, I find it helpful to be aware of how the idea is handled in other media. Oftentimes what we wind up seeing is what I call continuity time travel, the sort where you have to protect your origin. This is most iconic in the film Back to the Future, in which Marty McFly goes back in time and accidentally prevents an encounter that sets his parents en route to love and, in turn, Marty's own birth. As such, he needs to get his parents together, or he'll literally vanish from existence. Now, we suspend our disbelief and just sort of accept that. But think if he failed. He would vanish because he was never even born, so he'd never get in the time machine in the first place and would never have been able to cock-block his own conception. This is the most famous time travel paradox out there, the grandfather paradox. It seems logically impossible to imagine the effects of time traveling and preventing your own existence, and yet, we can understand pretty much everything leading up to that moment. The rest is a total mindfuck. The same can be said for what I dubbed the Hitler paradox. Let's say I've got a time machine and want to go back and kill Hitler, cause, you know, he's an evil pus nugget. I zip back in time and murder his infantile ass. What would the consequence of that be? Well, it'd from then on be a world free of Hitler's tyranny, and myself in that world would grow up with no motivation or need to kill someone who was already dead. As such, how could I have gone to the past to kill Hitler at all? Continuity time travel makes it seem like it's impossible to accomplish anything intentionally when time traveling, because doing so would rob you of your motivation and defeat the point of why you're even there. Another brain bruise comes in the form of the Predestination Paradox. Think back to the original Terminator. Skynet sends a Terminator back in time to kill Sarah Connor, the mother of John Connor, a child who grows up to become the leader of a rebellion against Skynet. John, in order to save his mom, sends one of his fellow soldiers into the past to protect her from the Terminator. The big twist is that the soldier he sent back in time actually becomes his dad. He saves Sarah Connor, bangs her, then dies. And that's definitively how John Connor comes to be. This should inherently bother you, at least a little, because you're asking, what the fuck? The only reason there is a John Connor is because Skynet wanted to prevent the birth of John Connor. If they hadn't tried to kill him, he wouldn't have existed in the first place. It's a chicken or the egg situation that if you try to wrap your head around it, you'll be that much closer to bleeding from your eyes. All these portrayals of time travel are great and interesting, but undeniably flawed in their logic and philosophy. And this is where Steins Gate stands out from the pack, using what I call Anomaly Time Travel. There are 3 methods of time travel seen in Steins Gate, but the most common and significant is the dmail. Okabe will send a mail message from his phone to another phone, only the message will arrive sometime in the past. There's essentially an anomaly at the moment someone's phone receives a dmail. From that moment onward, the universe essentially switches to a new timeline, because that mail will permanently alter the events that follow. It could be as benign and insignificant as a Facebook post, or it could start a friggin' war. The important part is that the dmail was sent from a different timeline, or world line as it's called in the anime. Okabe could send himself a dmail telling him to throw away his lab coat. There's a chance now that Okabe, when he receives this message in the past, listens to it and throws away his lab coat. In continuity time travel, it'd be smart to point out that he wouldn't need to tell himself to throw the coat away if it had already been done. But this is anomaly time travel. That dmail originated from a world line in which he did have a reason to throw away the coat, even if only for an experiment. The moment it arrives in the past, its origin on the new timeline no longer matters. This is what makes Steins Gate special, and why it gives us so much to think about. Now, it's time to dive right into the story, pointing out all the significant moments that come up. I want to give a special thanks to the folks who made the Steins Gate Wikia for creating a nifty chronological timeline that I'll be using in this video. I think it does a fantastic job at communicating the story. I'll provide the link in the description, so that you can follow along with this as I go. The narrative starts here on July 28th, 2010. Okabe and Mayuri are going to attend a presentation on time travel by Dr. Nakabachi. A few key things happen here. Okabe lends Mayuri money for buying a toy from a nearby capsule machine. The toy Mayuri gets is a rare metal Upa from a series called Rynet. She claims it's worth a lot of money. but refuses to sell it because she likes it. Shortly thereafter, Mayuri loses the toy somewhere in the building. Okabe listens to Dr. Nakabachi's time travel theory, only to notice that it's essentially the same theory that had been presented on the internet by a man named John Titor 10 years ago. Okabe makes a scene, upsetting Nakabachi. Makise pulls Okabe out of the room, and she claims that he had spoken to her just 15 minutes earlier, and was acting strangely. He avoids this, given that he'd never met her before. Still inside the building, Okabe receives a strange video message on his phone, but he can't watch it as it has a bad signal. He hears a loud scream on the upper floors, so he makes his way to the source and witnesses a key sight. Makise is lying on the floor in a pile of blood. He leaves the building with Mayuri, and, in panic, sends Daru a message saying that Makise Kurisu was stabbed. The moment he presses the send button on his phone, he feels this strange distortion, and suddenly, the world around him has changed. He looks up at the building he was just in, and sees that a large object has smashed into it. I'll pause here for some clarity. Obviously, Okabe has just sent his first dmail, and already its effects are heavy. It won't be for a while that he learns exactly what he's just done. Long story short, the massive scientific research organization CERN has been using the Large Hadron Collider to experiment sending humans back in time without any success. When Okabe sent his dmail, CERN's computers detected and recorded it. They use this to later on confront the lab. They kill Mayuri and take both Okabe and Daru captive, where they're forced to work on CERN's time travel research. By the year 2013, CERN has begun its plans for world domination. Okabe is eventually killed in the year 2025, but Daru manages to build a working, albeit flawed, time machine in the year 2033, but is killed shortly afterward. In 2034, CERN has succeeded in conquering the world. Daru's daughter, Amane Suzuha, takes the time machine her dad built and travels back to 2010, hoping to meet her father in addition to saving humanity from the upcoming dystopia. When she uses the machine, she crash lands into the building that was going to hold Dr. Nakabachi's presentation, and the event gets cancelled. So yeah, that one dmail winds up doing all of this, and Okabe has no friggin' clue. Confused, Okabe goes home, claiming to Daru and Mayuri that he did in fact attend Dr. Nakabachi's lecture. Daru thinks he's full of shit, citing that he was with Okabe when he saw the building with the mysterious object stuck in it. Daru claims that Okabe pointed at the building and declared it to be the work of the organization. Daru has credibility, as this is very much something Okabe would do, and yet he doesn't remember having done that. Furthermore, he and Daru go to another event, and, in the elevator, Daru notes that he received a mail a while back that was broken into separate messages, and he thought it was a prank. They arrive only to realize that Makise is still alive and well, despite Okabe having seen her dead corpse. Makise's creeped out by Okabe's reaction, but is somehow intrigued by the mystery of what he's saying. Also worth noting is that the self-proclaimed time traveler, John Titor, that Okabe was obsessed with and collected articles about, suddenly no longer exists. At this point, everyone thinks Okabe's fucking crazy, but this is all being caused by what I've named the Steiner fallacy. Turns out Okabe is special. He had some bizarre illness for a time as a child, which must have manifested with him a special ability he calls the Reading Steiner. He isn't aware of it yet, but his Reading Steiner allows him to retain his memories across world lines. And this moment in the story does a great job of illustrating exactly how that works. When Okabe sent his first dmail, at the exact moment he hit the send button, his memories traveled to the same moment on the new world line, overriding whatever the Okabe on that timeline knew and remembered. While it's convenient that Okabe can still recall the world line he was previously on, he's lacking some essential memories of the one he's currently on. Just imagine Okabe growing up in a world without John Titor, and not attending the presentation because it got cancelled. Okabe would obviously know that, since it is the timeline he grew up on, but at that moment on July 28th, those memories were all overwritten by those of the Okabe we've been watching so far. It's a tad confusing, but just realize that when Okabe sends a dmail, and the world he's a part of is suddenly different, he won't know exactly what has changed. Pretend, for example, that Okabe sent a dmail into the past, telling Daru to punch him in the face. Assuming that Daru does as the mail asks, the moment Okabe hits the send button on that mail, he'll likely have a black eye or some kind of bruise on his face. Clearly, he got punched, but he'll never have the memory of having been punched. In theory, there's a possibility that one of his dmails could get him killed, and sending that mail would essentially kill him on the spot. There's no guarantee he'll be in the same place, doing the same things with the same people, before and after sending a dmail. Back to the story. Out on the street, Okabe encounters Moeka, who takes his picture, and the two stay in relative contact. Amane Suzuha, who I've mentioned came from the future, starts working for Okabe's landlord, and eavesdrops on the lab's antics. On July 31st, we get an iconic and amusing scene. So there's this microwave that Okabe and Daru modified so that one could set the cook time via their cell phones, and it's had some odd behavior ever since. One such symptom is with Mayuri's bananas. Okabe thought it was worth trying to put a bunch of bananas in the microwave to see what would happen. And surprisingly, it turned the bananas into a gelatinous ooze. Turns out he's done this a few times, each to Mayuri's disappointment. Well, he's about to do it again, but Daru forces him to use only one banana so as to not waste the entire bunch along with Mayuri's hard-earned cash. He reluctantly agrees, and they put just the one banana in the microwave. After its heating cycle, they open the microwave and discover the banana has disappeared. They turn around and notice that the banana, turned to gel, is still attached to the bunch they pulled it from. This is the moment they first start to realize they've built a time machine. They put the banana in, and it warped back to being on the bunch. I initially wanted to cite this moment as a huge inconsistency with Steins Gate's logic, but I've since justified it. My initial concern was exactly when the banana reappeared on the bunch. If it jumped far back enough in time, Okabe and Daru would have tried to pluck the banana, only to notice it somehow already turned to gel. Obviously, they wouldn't have tried the experiment if that were the case. That means the banana warped back in time to a point where Okabe and Daru had already put the banana in and were still staring at the microwave instead of the bunch. That way, they could actually turn around and be surprised. Otherwise, it'd be a Hitler paradox, thanks to Daru also being part of the experiment. It also bothered me that the banana didn't just travel time, but space as well. It literally teleported out of the microwave and onto the bunch. But how would the microwave know where to send it? If you think about it though, how the hell would a microwave know where to send an email to a phone in the past? Where that phone is now, versus a day ago, could be completely different locations. Honestly, this is where all the fiction in sci-fi comes about. We're talking about a time travel microwave after all. If we accept that we can send stuff back in time at all, it's no stranger to accept it can send it to a particular place, too. This scene, thankfully, yet barely, manages to stay true to the anime's overall logic. Makise shows up to the apartment to see the gel banana. She's curious what they're up to, and decides to work with them until she goes back to America. She finds out from Daru that he was testing the microwave on the 28th, around the same time Okabe sent his dmail, explaining why it actually worked. After some more experiments using Mayuri's poor chicken tenders, Okabe finally declares they've stumbled onto a time machine. By the 1st of August, Okabe, still baffled by the lack of John Titor's appearance 10 years ago, pokes around on the internet until, conveniently, Okabe finds someone online claiming to be John Titor, saying the same things Okabe remembers him saying. The two chat, and Okabe is told about the dystopian future in store for them, thanks to CERN. Titor also mentions that the key to thwarting them was an old computer, the IBM 5100, which was capable of speaking CERN's proprietary computer language. Curious about Titor's words, Okabe ambitiously encourages Daru to use the IBM to hack into CERN, which they soon wind up doing. This is when Okabe and Daru discover some mysterious operations at CERN that seem to have ended in failure. By reading documents that end with the text, "Human is dead, mismatch." Daru is unable to hack CERN further due to the aforementioned proprietary code. So Okabe does some poking around in trying to find the IBM computer. Okabe discovers from Feris that her father once had the computer, but he gave it to the Yanabayashi shrine. Sure enough, Okabe and Makise pay a visit to Ruka at the shrine and are able to retrieve the IBM. With the IBM all set up, Daru is able to hack further into CERN, and it's revealed that CERN had made various attempts at time travel. They all failed, with their human research subjects showing up at some point in time as gel people. Turns out CERN's doing the same thing as the phone wave, only using living beings instead of bananas. Yikes. Moeka discovers that Okabe has the IBN and begs to see it. In response, he accepts her as a new lab member. The group tries sending another dmail, this time sending some winning lotto numbers into the past. They send the mail, but it doesn't seem to have any major effect, since the Okabe who got the message asked Ruka to purchase the ticket, and he accidentally gets the number wrong. Okabe messages John Titor, who helps him understand his reading Steiner ability. On August 4th, Okabe invites Moeka to the lab, and after once again seeing the time machine, she requests the chance to send a dmail of her very own. Not being too careful, the lab lets her do it, without even reading the message she plans to send. She claims it's a message to tell herself to buy a new phone. They send the dmail, and Okabe feels a significant shift in world lines. Now, both Moeka and the IBN are gone, and nobody but Okabe even remembers her. We discover later that Moeka actually works for CERN vicariously, under orders from a person called FB, and it's her mission to obtain the IBN 5100. So the dmail she just sent herself told her she could find the IBN at the shrine one day before Okabe got his hands on it. This makes it obvious that Moeka stole the IBN and no longer needed Okabe. Of course, he doesn't know this yet, so he remains confused and doesn't see the harm in his actions. 2 days later, on the 6th of August, Ruka asks Okabe if he can send a dmail, this time to his mother's pager before he was born. Ruka hopes that, by convincing her mom to eat meat while pregnant, there's a chance he might actually be born as a girl. None of the lab members think it'll do any harm, so they let Ruka message her mom, "Eat meat for a healthy child," all the way back to 1992. The mail is sent, and Okabe feels a world line shift, but is reluctant to see if Ruka actually changed sex. The next day, August 7th, Fedis finds out about the time machine and also wants to use it. Okabe lets her send a dmail, and the results are severe. Suddenly, Okabe meets Ferris's father, and all of Akihabara is a normal electronics district without the major influence of Moe culture. The mail Fedis sent was to her father, warning him when she was taken hostage 10 years ago. This, in turn, saves her father's life, and as a result, prevents Fedis from turning Akihabara into an otaku metropolis. Okabe refers to Ruka as a guy, and everyone gets outraged. He tries to prove his point, but winds up groping Ruka, who actually did get turned into a woman by having her mother eat meat while pregnant. Note that without the Steiner fallacy I mentioned before, Okabe would have known Ruka was now a girl. As the lab continues to experiment with the phone wave, it is discovered that it only works at times of the day when a large TV in Okabe's landlord's shop is turned on. The CRT television is shown to play some role in how the phone wave works. Okabe finds out that Suzuha was actually in Akihabara to search for her father, but it's now time for her to leave as she spent too much time looking. She leaves, but Okabe, feeling sorry for her and wanting her to reunite with her father, sends a dmail to himself, telling him to follow her and have her stay longer. He effectively extends the time Suzuha stays in town. Around this time, Okabe is getting some vague yet threatening mail from an unknown sender. He begins to think CERN is onto them, having hacked in. Makise has been working on an upgrade to the phone wave, turning it into the Time Leap machine, capable of sending a person's memories into the past. She's able to finish the machine because she uses the Large Hadron Collider at CERN as a means of compressing one's mental data. They succeed in building it, but rather than keeping it to themselves, they decide to go public with their findings. On August 13th, the lab celebrates with pizza, but is interrupted when Moeka and other rounders bust into the apartment toting guns. They shoot Mayuri, deeming her unnecessary. They plan to capture Okabe, Daru, and Makise, as I mentioned before, forcing them to research time travel under CERN. In the chaos, Suzuha creates a distraction, allowing Okabe to use the Time Leap machine to send his mind back 48 hours. He tries to save Mayuri from her tragic fate with the precognition of CERN's attack, but fails, not once, but many times in various ways. It seems like no matter what he does, Mayuri is destined to die. Trying in vain to save her causes Okabe to fall into despair, but he is comforted in part by confiding in and divulging his struggle to Makise. The two of them analyze the situation, and are interrupted by Suzuha, who had been listening in. She reveals herself to be a time traveler, who writes under the alias John Titor, and shows them the time machine she crashed into the building and canceled Nakabachi's presentation with. It is at this point we're told of a huge element in the Steins Gate time travel logic: Attractor Fields. Admittedly, this part's very sci-fi and doesn't seem like it'd make too much sense, but they use this idea very well to create some interesting drama. Essentially, while there are seemingly endless different potential world lines the universe could follow, some of them are grouped together. That, no matter what small changes alter one world line from another, they inevitably share similar events. Currently, all the world lines Okabe's been to since sending the first dmail have been part of what is called the Alpha Attractor Field. Sadly, all the world lines in this field converge on Mayuri's inevitable death. For some reason, her death is a key moment that always occurs within all world lines in that field. Visually, it'd be like tying a knot in a group of parallel threads. At that knot, all the threads would converge on a single moment before separating once more. The time machine is damaged and in need of repair. Suzuha enlists Daru to help fix the machine. During this time, they discover that Daru is actually her father. Suzuha's goal is to use the time machine to travel back to 1975 and obtain the IBN 5100 for Okabe in the lab. She notes that they need the IBN to delete the dmail records on CERN's servers. Doing so would effectively stop CERN's uprising and prevent Mayuri's death. Once it's repaired, Suzuha travels back in time and Okabe receives a haunting letter. Apparently, Suzuha makes it to 1975, but winds up losing her memories after a faulty landing. By the time she remembers her mission, it's too late, and she commits suicide after writing her letter. Okabe blames all of this on the fact that he kept Suzuha from leaving 2 days prior. To fix it, he sends himself a dmail that would discredit the first one. He undoes the effects of his mail, telling him to follow Suzuha, by sending a follow-up dmail informing him that it's a trap from the organization. As such, the world line shifts, and Okabe no longer follows Suzuha, but lets her go early. He confirms from his landlord, Tenoji-san, that Suzuha didn't commit suicide, but actually lived a happy life. Unfortunately, none of these efforts are large enough to prevent Mayuri's death, which still occurs 1 day later than it used to. To make matters worse, he still doesn't have the IBN, so he can't erase his dmails from CERN. He's left with but one option: to continue to undo the effects of his dmails, effectively jumping back world lines until he can once again obtain the IBN. Working in reverse order, Okabe convinces Feris to send a mail undoing the original that saved her father. She reluctantly agrees, and they send a mail telling her father that she was only joking about being kidnapped. After this, he still lacks the IBN, but he's postponed Mayuri's death by another day. Let's take a quick break to touch upon one of the few logic flaws I have with this awesome anime. You'll see that as he undoes the effects of his dmails, he keeps gaining time until CERN rounders assassinate Mayuri. I can't personally think of a good reason as to why this happens, other than for the convenience of the plot. The reason CERN attacks the lab is because they have been tracking Okabe's dmails since the beginning. Assuming that deleting the dmails would actually throw CERN off the trail, despite already having sent him threats, there's no understood metric for how early CERN's attack will be. You'd think that by sending more dmails, Okabe provokes CERN into attacking sooner. Unfortunately, Okabe isn't erasing anything at this point. He's sending one dmail to counteract the other. It's like trying to score with a girl by telling her she's as beautiful as a rose, but ruin it because you said she had nice tits. As he undoes his dmails, he's sending even more that CERN could track. So if anything, he'd be provoking the attack rather than delaying it. Moving on, Okabe needs to undo the mail sent to Ruka's mother. Ruka, being very understanding, agrees to go back and be born as a male, so long as Okabe takes her on a date. It's a tad clumsy, but ultimately satisfies Ruka enough to go forward with the dmail. She sends a follow-up to her mom, discrediting the original advice of eating meat for a healthy baby. Okabe shifts world lines, and Ruka is back to being a guy. Still without the IBN, Okabe somehow has to prevent Moeka from stealing it from him. He looks for Moeka, but she winds up committing suicide after being abandoned by her text-only employer, FB. Okabe uses the machine to show up earlier at her apartment and winds up stealing her phone, but is unable to undo her original mail's effects unless she receives direct orders from FB. Instead, Okabe interrogates Moeka into revealing what she did with the IBN. He reveals that by letting him track the IBN, he could actually help Moeka learn who FB is and why she'd been abandoned. She lets him know she hid the IBN in a locker, and the two of them set up to tail the computer until it arrives at its destination. What they find is shocking, that the networking CERN agent FB is actually Tenoji-san, the landlord. He reveals how he'd been trapped working for CERN, and sees no end in sight. He shoots Moeka, and then himself. In the tragic aftermath, Okabe grabs Tenoji's phone and uses it to dmail Moeka that the IBN is no longer necessary. This changes world lines, and Okabe is now in possession of the IBN as he once was, no longer having been sold, broken, or stolen. Okabe has Dadu hack CERN one more time in order to delete his dmail history, but realizes that by preventing a CERN uprising and saving Mayuri, he'll also be going back to the world lines where Makise dies after Nakabachi's presentation. He postpones the deletion, but discovers he has no choice if he plans on saving Mayuri. He tells Makise about his tough choice, and she eventually decides it's best to proceed even if it means she dies. Caught in the rain, Makise notices a tear in Okabe's lab coat and repairs it with a pink thread. They confess their love for one another before parting ways. Okabe takes the next step and deletes the dmails from CERN, experiencing a major world line shift. He confirms Makise's absence, not only with his lab mates, but also by the fact that his coat no longer contains the pink thread. We can safely say that Okabe is now on what is called the Beta Attractor Field, which is essentially just like what he saw at the beginning of the anime, about 20 days later. Deleting the dmails functioned very similar to sending one, and that Okabe's reading Steiner transferred his memories from the Alpha field on August 17th into the mind of Okabe from the Beta world line that same moment. This is where the anime and visual novel start to get really vague and wind up taking some strange leaps in logic. If you really think about it, would it even be possible to get past July 28th on the Beta Attractor Field? That's the day the original Okabe sent the very first dmail. Technically, the moment he does that, the mail will go right back into CERN's data and lead to a CERN uprising. You can delete the data all you want, but it won't stop the first dmail from being sent. It looks like an infinite loop. Really, the only way I can fathom this is if by deleting the mails from CERN's system on one world line, he's doing it for all world lines. In that case, the Okabe from episode 1, who sent the first dmail, will still do exactly that, but will be sending a completely benign dmail that CERN doesn't hold on to, so it doesn't have any effect on events whatsoever. That Okabe would send the mail to Dadu and likely go home, hanging around the lab, screwing around with future gadgets until his reading Steiner kicks in on August 17th. To be fair, CERN's ability to intercept dmails on any world line is unrealistically impressive, so it's no further stretch to assume that deleting the mails deletes them from all world lines too. Okabe, now on the Beta Attractor Field, becomes depressed until, bizarrely enough, he's called to the roof of the presentation building. There, he finds Suzuha and an improved time machine. She lays down one hell of a revelation. The future, even in the first episode, was headed down a dark path. In a future in which CERN doesn't rise to power, various nations wind up competing to be the first to create a time machine, throwing everyone into World War III. Suzuha comes from the future this time, but a very different future than before. The time machine's a hell of a lot better and more stable. She also mentions that she's already visited the year 2000 and wrote about time travel as John Titor, which explains why Okabe used to be a collector of Titor's books and articles. Regardless, she now insists that Okabe come with her in an attempt to save Makise from being killed on July 28th, believing that would ultimately prevent World War III. The two venture back in time, and Okabe enters the presentation building on his own. There, he has to avoid his past self and confront Makise. He does, and is dumbfounded with the fact that she's alive. This encounter explains why Makise said she already met Okabe just moments before. After the presentation, he stakes out the place where he found Makise dead and eavesdrops on a conversation between Makise and who we find out is her father, Dr. Nakabachi. Trying to get back on his good side, Makise offers up a working time travel theory to jointly publish with him. Being the jealous bastard he is, Nakabachi attacks Makise and steals the paper for himself. Okabe intervenes and goes in for the kill. But Makise leaps between them and takes the hit. Again, just like Mayuri, Okabe is unable to save someone he cares for. Okabe now fears that, just like on the Alpha Attractor Field, the Beta Attractor Field will always converge on Makise's death, and nothing can save her. At this time, Okabe receives a mysterious mail telling him to turn on a TV. He uses his phone and watches a news broadcast mentioning how Dr. Nakabachi defected to Russia with Makise's time travel paper in tow. Apparently, the airplane he was to board caught fire and would have destroyed the paper if a metal object hadn't set off the detector. Turns out, when Mayuri lost her precious metal upa way back, Makise found it. This upa was in the envelope with the paper and wound up saving the theory from burning. That theory on time travel is what leads straight to World War III. Now, it's important to note that Steins Gate switches point of view at this moment. If we are to think of this chronologically, we dive into Steins Gate 0 territory. Okabe, tormented by being unable to save Makise, gives up and leaves things as they are. For the next 15 years, Okabe is haunted by his failure, surviving through World War III before finally discovering a way to save Makise and prevent the war from happening. As one of his final acts before dying in the year 2025, Okabe records and sends a video dmail to his past self on July 28th. This is the same scrambled signal Okabe tries to look at in the presentation building, but can't view. Back to the Okabe who is just about to give up on saving Makise. He's told to try looking at his video mail again, and this time it plays. His future self from the year 2025 explains that the beta attractor field converges not on Makise's death, but on Okabe sending the first dmail. As such, all he has to do is trick his past self into seeing what looks like Makise dead in a pool of blood, without her actually being dead. In this sense, he can trick the attractor field and get what he wants. With this knowledge, Okabe is prepared to try saving Makise once more, now with the added mission of somehow preventing World War III. If he's able to do this, he'll have reached the Steins Gate world line, which is basically the world line in which he can have everything that he wants. Everybody be alive, and no dystopian future. They travel once more, back to July 28th. Now, I'm generally inclined to believe that when time traveling to the same spot twice, you'd get another brand new copy of the original. You'd think Okabe would now have to avoid both his original self and the self from his previous failed attempt. Rather, I can only assume that, when physically time traveling with the time machine, you're technically visiting a new world line each time, which in effect is like starting on a blank slate. Something I'm personally willing to let slide. Okabe goes through the same moments as his last attempt, but goes ahead and buys a capsule toy before Mayuri approaches it. Of course, he gets the metal upa and tucks it away so that Makise's paper gets destroyed in the aircraft fire to come. He goes to the scene of the crime and witnesses a very similar confrontation. This time, Okabe provokes Nakabachi into attacking him with a knife. He takes that hit, causing Nakabachi to run away in fear, stealing the research paper. Proceeding with the plan, Okabe tases Makise. He brought with some fake blood, but it dried up. Without enough blood, Okabe is forced to open his own wound to bleed out on the floor. He then leaves Makise in the puddle of blood before returning with Suzuha to the time machine. They set a course for August 21st, and mid-flight, Suzuha begins to vanish because, on the Steins Gate world line, she would not have used the time machine. Next, we see that Okabe has been hospitalized for his wounds. The following month, Okabe passes Makise on the street, and she has vague memories of him, albeit unclear. The final episode of the anime is a bit of a bonus, in which Makise deals with her cloudy memories of Okabe and begins to fall in love with him again. The true end of Steins Gate's visual novel, the same as in the anime, clearly ends on a happy note, but it makes some major liberties in its own logic to become so. In the final moments when Okabe views his older self through the video dmail, he's told that it's important to ensure his previous self sends the first dmail, as it will send him on a journey that's led up to now. The problem I have with this is that Okabe, when sending a dmail, isn't traveling anywhere physically. If world lines change, his memories simply carry over. As such, the Okabe on the Steins Gate world line, who sends the first dmail, is still hanging around after the mail fails to cause a temporal shift now that CERN doesn't get its hands on it. Nowhere in the anime or visual novel do we hear about what that Okabe is up to from July 28th to August 21st. In any of the world lines leading up to World War III, this isn't an issue, since that Okabe eventually gets new memories via reading Steiner and is soon picked up in the time machine by Suzuha. This effectively gets rid of the original Okabe, so when the time machine arrives, the new Okabe can take his place. However, on the Steins Gate world line, Suzuha doesn't come and pick anyone up, so there's no reason that the original Okabe, sender of the first dmail, wouldn't still be hanging around then, when the Okabe who's bleeding and in need of hospitalization arrives in the time machine. I can't see a single reason as to why there wouldn't be two Okabe at this moment. One with the memories of the entire journey, and one who's still completely naive to anything that's happened. Furthermore, since Suzuha didn't call anyone to the top of the presentation building on the Steins Gate World line, neither Daru nor Mayuri would be there to greet him upon arrival. Even stranger, if Suzuha literally disappears, Back to the Future style, because they've reached the Steins Gate line, why the hell wouldn't the time machine vanish too? Lastly, why the hell wouldn't the bleeding Okabe vanish and have his memories carry over to the original Okabe? Instead, we're left with the hospitalized Okabe carrying on as if he's the only one, and no mention of the original Okabe or how he disappeared. I love this anime, but feel they just ignored something vital when presenting the story. For the sake of a clean, happy end, we're all able to simply assume that, somehow, the two Okabe merge, or one disappears, to ensure only one Okabe lives beyond August 21st. Another wild observation isn't technically a plot hole, but it does introduce a bittersweet twist to the story. Recall how the reading Steiner works. Okabe sends a dmail, and no matter what changes that dmail causes, his memories from the moment he hits the send button carry over to the new world line and override whatever memories the Okabe of that world line had. As such, Okabe will wind up not having memory of anything that happened after the dmail arrived in the past. Well, the entire story was made possible because the Okabe who failed to save Makise spent 15 years struggling to find a way to bypass the Attractor Field convergence. That Okabe sends a video dmail to himself 15 years prior, and the end result is successfully reaching the Steins Gate world line. If you really think about it, and hold the show consistently to its own presented logic, the failure Okabe would hit the send button, and his memories would carry into the Steins Gate world line. His memories would override those of the Okabe that actually saved Makise. Let's suppose that Okabe and Makise wind up getting married and having children during that 15-year gap. It'd look like suddenly, one day in 2025, Okabe wakes up without any memory of having actually settled down with Makise. A huge part of their relationship would be overridden, and the future Okabe would finally get to see Makise again. It would be a small price to pay, given a world line in which Mayuri and Makise both live unharmed. Now, I won't get into too much detail for the Steins Gate movie, but the general idea is that Okabe, having gone through so much trauma and having visited many different world lines, is having his reading Steiner go haywire, causing him to literally vanish out of thin air. Makise, who realizes Okabe's absence when nobody else does, that her vague memories of him and from other possible realities occur in lapses of deja vu. Anyone who's experienced change between world lines has a reading Steiner, albeit much weaker than Okabe's. She winds up parting with Okabe, and is similarly tormented by being apart. In this world line, without Okabe, Makise builds a time machine, and Suzuha uses it to travel back and teach Makise how to save Okabe. She would have to do something so significant that it forever reminds Okabe which world line he belongs to. Makise and Suzuha go back in time to 2005, and Makise winds up comforting a troubled, young Okabe by telling him the story of Hoin Kyoma and kissing him. Given that this is the only world line in which this has happened, it serves to anchor Okabe's erratic reading Steiner and keep him on the Steins Gate world line. It's a short side story that doesn't interfere too much with the original narrative. All things considered, nothing that I've mentioned as a logical flaw in time travel is irredeemable. It still manages to be way more consistent and thorough than any other work of time travel sci-fi. They in no way tarnish the high praises I give this anime. If anything, they've got me psyched for Steins Gate Zero, which may serve to clarify some of my concerns. This concludes my in-depth analysis of Steins Gate. If you think you have the answer to some of my probing questions, please let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, subscribe to my channel for anime and game lists, news, discussions, reviews, and Let's Plays. Be sure to check out OtakuDaiKun on Facebook for various reactions and news updates pertaining to anime and game goodies. Until then, celebrate your fandom.